Welcome back to the Bean Museum, everybody. Today is Friday, so we are going to be talking, we're going to be doing a Life Science Live, where I will be talking about a life science subject. Today we're talking about bees and pollination, and you guys can comment down below with any questions or other things that you want to comment about because it's live. All right, so today we're talking about bees and pollination. So first things first, let's talk about pollination in general, why we need it, how plants use it, things like that. So pollination is the way that some plants reproduce. Now there's lots of different ways that plants can pollinate, and some of them need help with it more than others. So for example, there are some plants that can self-pollinate. So the way that pollination works is when the pollen from the male anther, that's the part of the plant, the anther, is put on the female stigma, and so when the pollen is brought to the stigma, it allows it to produce seed and sometimes along with that, fruit. So some plants have the anther and the stigma in the same flower, and those plants are able to self-pollinate. So they don't need as much assistance from outside sources, other pollinators. Some plants have flowers that have a stigma and some flowers that have an anther, but it's still on the same plant. And then some plants produce only male flowers and only female flowers. So those ones in particular need assistance from pollinators to be able to create fruit and to produce seed. Now there are other ways for plants to reproduce than just through pollination. If we think about aspens, for example, we see lots of quaking aspens out here in the mountains of Utah. We're able to see that the aspen actually sends up shoots. So it puts down roots, it sends them out in a network, and then it sends up shoots of the exact same genetic tree. So it's a clone of the tree that originally put out its roots. So that's pretty cool because we can go out, we can actually test quaking aspens, and we can look at their genetic code from one that is hundreds of miles from the other one. And because it's one giant living organism that has connected itself through roots, it is the same genes as the original tree. So that is one way that some plants can reproduce. Like I said, some of them can self-pollinate, which is where the pollen from the anther falls on the stigma and on the exact same plant. Now, that sounds a lot easier than having to reproduce using other creatures, having to use pollinators. So why are pollinators a benefit? Well, if we look at it, having the exact same genetic code, either from a cloning like the aspen or using self-pollination, can sometimes be not as much of a benefit. Imagine for a moment if there was a specific disease that the plant could catch, or a specific pest that the plant could be preyed on by. If that pest or that disease, if that one plant isn't resistant to it, then all of the plants that have come from that one, since they have the same genetic code, are not going to be resistant to it. So we're going to have that same issue. We could have, if there's some disease that is a quaking aspen, for example, would be really could easily be preyed upon by, it would kill that tree and all the ones of its same genetic code. So pollination, especially between different plants, allows for the plants to have more genetic diversity, which gives them more protection against things like pests and diseases and things like that. So it's more work, but it means it's a more payoff as well for the plant. So that's how pollination works. That's why pollination is a benefit to plants. So let's talk about the pollinators. Now, when you guys think of a pollinator, what animals do you usually think of? My guess is probably a honeybee, right? We've learned a lot about honeybees and how honeybees, how they actually pollinate lots and lots of different plants. Now, the honeybee we're really familiar with, but it's actually an introduced species. It's the European honeybee. So that was an insect that was brought from Europe to North America, and now we have them here to help pollinate, but also to produce honey and other things like that. So the question is, if it's not honeybees, if they were brought in by Europeans, what about the native plants that were here before the Europeans came? Well, it's actually kind of interesting. There are hundreds of different kinds of bees alone, besides other pollinators. So I have a couple of displays like this. This here is various Hymenoptera, so it's going to be bees and wasps, but there are actually 900 different species of bees that are native here to Utah. Just to Utah. Across North America, there are 4,000 species of bees. So right here, you're seeing a lot of black and white striped insects. And your automatic thought when you see something like this is probably, oh, it's a bee or it's a wasp. And some of these are wasps. And even though some of them aren't the familiar honeybee or bumblebee that we're used to seeing, they're also, some of these are bees. And they all belong to the same order, Hymenoptera. So that's why it's labeled like that and why they're all put together. So they are part of the same order. So we've got lots of different wasps and bees in here. Some of them I know, like this one right here is a wasp. This one right here is a bee. But in general, they all look pretty similar, don't they? I actually have some more down here. These are some more Hymenoptera. Again, some of these are wasps and some of them are bees. This right here is a wasp called a Tarantula Hawk. These guys prey on tarantulas, which is pretty cool. But anyways, let's talk about them as pollinators. Now, again, like I said, there are some plants that pollinate, but some of them you don't even need the help from pollinators. Some of them use non-living pollination, such as the wind. So corn, for example, can just use the wind blowing through the cornfields and will spread the pollen from the corn onto the stigma of other corn plants, and that produces the ears of corn that we love to eat. But often with things like fruit trees or other plants, we need pollinators. So we have right here some bees and wasps, and like I mentioned, there are 900 different species of bees here in Utah, and that's not including any wasp species either. So 900 different pollinators. Now, you might be thinking, that's a lot of bees. I don't see nearly as many like bees nests as I feel like I should if there's that many kinds of bees. And there's a very specific reason for that. So of these species of bees, there are only 3 kinds of bees native to, or that live in Utah that create hives the way that we think of. So there's the European honeybee, like I listed before. There are bumblebees and sweat bees. And those 3 types of bees all create large colonies in, they create nests with large colonies. Other bees are actually quite solitary. So let me just show you, this is a wasp's nest, big one that we've got here. Let's see if I can get a good angle on this. Let's see, there we go. Got a nice big wasp nest here. So wasps are also very social. They create large hives like this, but some of them create really little hives. You might find like little tiny hives that are like this big and just a couple of combs in there, and that is created by some bees or wasps that don't need to create giant hives. They don't have giant social structures the way that honeybees do. Now, because they aren't as social as the other ones, that means that some of them also don't have stingers or venom. The stinger and the venom really are most beneficial for insects that are in this big group, or for the Hymenoptera. So wasps and bees that are in this big group, and may need to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the hive. But if you've just got one bee that is not a social bee, for example, an orchard bee, those guys are really helpful in orchards, as the name suggests. They pollinate a lot of fruit trees that we have here in Utah. And they'll find a little already made hole. So they don't dig holes at all, but they'll find some little spot, maybe like a crack between branches, or even under your head, somewhere along your house, something like that. They'll lay a couple of eggs in their little tiny little hive that they've made, and then that's it. They don't need to have this big social structure. So there's not really a lot of point to having the venom and the stinger, especially if, like other bees, they would lose their stinger and it would kill them eventually. So that sacrifice really isn't worth it for most kinds of bees. So can you get stung by a lot of bees and wasps here in Utah? Sure, but just because you see a black and white insect doesn't mean you need to automatically be afraid of it stinging you, because it might just be a little bee that doesn't have that stinger or that venom even. All right. Now, there are lots of different kinds of pollinators besides bees as well, which is actually why we're here in front of our lovely beetle collection right here. So bees are excellent pollinators. They benefit a lot of different flowers, and a lot of different plants, as well as us as humans, but they also have preferences the same way that we do. We like to eat certain things that other animals might not like, and other animals like to eat things that we might not like. There are animals that eat things like bark, and generally we don't eat those parts of the plant. So bees are similar. They have a preference towards certain flowers that look a certain way, that attract them, and that have a specific kind of shape. So there are other kinds of insects and animals that pollinate things that will it kind of covers the whole spectrum of all the different plants. So for example, I said that beetles sometimes pollinate. So there are beetles that will eat. There we go. All right, so generally beetles will prefer to have a lower to the ground, really shallow flower, because then if they are nectar eating beetles, they can easily reach it without the fact that some of them don't have wings, they only crawl around. It's just really easy to reach, and it's something that they prefer. There are other kinds of pollinators. Ants can pollinate things. We also have, I got a list right here, let me make sure I don't miss anybody. We have bees, ants, beetles. Oh, we also have bats. Bats are typically found in the Southwest, pollinating things. They can be found worldwide, but as far as pollinators go, they're typically found in the Southwest. Here's a bat that I have here. There we go. Look at that cute little face. So these guys, often when we think of bats, when you think, okay, well, what does a bat eat? You probably think of vampire bats pretty quickly. Those guys drink blood from different creatures. They're the only ones that drink blood. So there's lots of other species of bats. There are fruit bats, generally, that live in South America. So then we have all the bats that live here in Utah. So what do they eat? Well, generally, bats eat insects, but a lot of them also eat nectar, especially in the desert. They prefer really big flowers, really large flowers with slightly shallower so that the nectar is easier to reach, and really sweet flowers. So bats will often pollinate for things like cactuses, actually, because they smell super sweet and super strong to attract as many pollinators as they can, because there aren't as many in the desert. So then the bats will come along, drink the nectar. And if the bat comes along, it drinks from one flower, and then it goes to another flower. It's going to take some of the pollen, like when it, just from touching its body to the flower, it's going to take some of the pollen and bring it to another flower, which is pretty cool. So we have, what did I say? We just finished up with bats. Let's look at another one we got here. We have butterflies. Butterflies are a really fun one. We love to see butterflies like in our backyard and things, and they are pollinators. Some butterflies only drink from specific flowers, such as the monarch butterfly only eats from the milkweed plant. But there are lots of different butterflies that will drink from lots of different flowers, and they will pollinate as they go. There also is an important one, are moths. This right here is a sphinx moth, and this one is super important to the Utah desert in particular because they are a major pollinator of the desert flowers. Now these guys, pretty big moth here. They've got a really long proboscis, a really long tongue that allows them to drink from the flower, so they can stick it way down into the flower and slurp it all up, and they drink the nectar from that. So we have butterflies, we have moths, even flies can be pollinators. Just from the sweet, sweet smell of nectar, that will attract lots of different things, including also hummingbirds. That's another fun one to see in your backyard. Hummingbirds in particular like really deep flowers because they have such a long mouth and a long tongue that it allows them to really reach into the really deep flowers and they can get the extra good nectar. And through doing all these things, through all these different animals visiting these plants to take the nectar from them, they will help the plant in return by pollinating for them. So they have a mutually beneficial relationship where the insect or the animal gets nectar, gets sugar, energy, all of that stuff without actually harming the plant, and the plant gets to pass on its genes in a very genetically diverse way. So that's all we have today about pollination, about pollinators. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment them down below. We'll try and get back to you as soon as we can with those answers. Also feel free to comment any suggestions of topics you'd like to see for Life Science Live. If there's anything you've just been itching to learn about and you want to hear us talk about them, let us know. We might have some really cool stuff in our collection to help teach you. So go ahead, comment those down below, and we will see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.